So just to recap, in the previous video, we set up our custom domain and we can now get to our API using our own domain. One problem we kept on running into is validating the stage name. Now, if you're working at this in a real environment, and when I say real, I mean you would have separate environments for dev, for prod. You wouldn't necessarily run into this problem, right? The issue is every time we update our stage, it forces CloudFormation or SAM template to recreate the resources, and then there's a conflict. So bear this in mind. If this was two separate environments, this approach would work. However, we're seeing it just for this demo purpose. It's not the perfect solution. So what I'll do is I'll go back and change this to dev, and we're going to use a different condition. If we open up our CloudWatch log, we'll see that in the request context and also in the header, the O shows us the domain. So this was after we changed our domain, and this is prior to us changing our domain. So here we're seeing the default API endpoint that AWS gives us, and we're seeing the very same thing here. So what we can do is, knowing that we hard coded our domain or we know our domain beforehand, we can use the domain name check or the host name, and that will kind of differentiate if this is running in production or in dev. So if we go back to our template, I am going to add a variable, and I'm just going to call this a parameter. I'm going to call this domain name, or let's call this actually let's stick with domain name, and this will be a type string, and we'll set the default to beams. Now, why couldn't we use this? We could, however, would have to trim this dot. If you look on the domain itself, there is no trailing dot for full qualifying. So we want to make sure we can at least check with a matching string. So just to make this less confusing, let's call this domain name param. And if we go to our create URL function, we're going to add a environment variable. We're going to call this domain name. And let's just reference so we can grab that value. And now programmatically in our Python code, we can grab these value and do the condition from there. And let's go back to our Python code. And let's add a domain name param os.environ.get. And we still need our stage. And we do need to know that the domain name is a part of the context dictionary. So let's add a domain name event. And actually, let's just copy this. Avoid this typo. And that will be domain name. So now we have our domain name. Instead of using the stage as the validator, what we can say is if our domain name param is in domain name, then we know it's it would be the actual prod environment. So we can either, so the option is we can flip this or we can use not in. So we can say if, let's write this, domain name param not in domain name. So if there is no match, then we're in dev, else prod. And that's pretty much all we need. So I'm going to clear this and I'm going to do a SAM build. And let's do a SAM deploy. Now, one thing to always pay attention to is based on how we click through our previous deployment, you want to make sure that this Toml file is updated with the correct parameter out, otherwise our template will fail. So let me just make sure I add dev, since we changed this back to dev, right? So that we don't have to go through this deployment twice. So let me just clear this and we'll do a SAM build again. And then we'll push this up. And we won't be. So let's go over to Postman and let's try to create a new URL. And there we go. So now our stage shouldn't be showing. And if this was actually not using custom domain, we would have stage. So for moment of truth, we want to test this and see if it works. And there we go. And let's just create a new one. All right, let's actually do this again. New tab. And I'm going to visit this twice, so our count should be incremented. Let's visit this again. And let's do our get. Okay, so we still have that. So let's actually create another API. This time this will be a get. And I think it get URLs. So let's try this a try. And there we go. So we probably need to show our clicks in this, right? So if we go to CloudFormation, and open up our resources, I'm just going to jump to our table, explore table items. We should see a couple of new ones I've been testing. So we do need to get or get, it'll be a lot more clearer. So let's go back into our get URLs. And here we need to bring back clicks. So let's do clicks. And how do we know it's clicks? If we look back at our table, let's just open up one, and that should be clicks. So let's save this, SAM build, going to deploy, and let's just run our get again. Now we're seeing clicks. So let's make sure we are. Also, we probably need to compute the shard URL, right? We have the code, we have the domain. We are not saving the shard code computed at runtime, but we can programmatically perform that lookup. So if we grab, let's say we grab one of these, yep. So one thing we probably need to do to, apart from the clicks, is to add the actual URL. And so we could just grab the URL from here. When we perform a post, we are showing the URL, but we probably need to do the same thing when we do gets. Now we can dynamically compute this. We aren't saving it, but it is a combination of the domain and shard code. So if we open up our get URLs, here where we're getting those filtered items, we can dynamically create our shard URL. And this will be a combination of the host in the event and shard code. So we probably need to grab a few things. So within our filtered item, we need to show the shard URL. And there's one thing we need to grab first, right? We need the base URL or base path. And that will be coming from the event. host, and let's confirm this. We actually do the same thing in our create URL. So we get it from headers and host. And now we can compute this at runtime. So this will be our short URL. And we're going to create the f string. And this just a Python syntax that allows us to combine multiple strings dynamically. HTTPS. And we're going to use our base path slash, and we're going to get the same shard code from here. So now since this is computed at runtime, we still need to perform this quite similar to what we did above. And this will be shard code. And that should be it. So let's go ahead and save this. And I'm going to do a SAM build. And push. And that was very quick. So let's go back to our Postman. And let's do a get lookup. And there we go. So if we give this a try, and this should be incrementing our count as well. So let's send this, and this was C1. So let's try again. And there we go. So our code pretty much works. We have a dynamic way of creating our URL. So if we go to create URL, we are checking the domain name and see if it matches. If it doesn't match, we know we're running in a non-prod environment, which would require stage. Else, we're using custom domain. Again, you can stick to using the stage dynamically if you're using multiple environments. So if you're deploying your first set of code in dev without custom domain, and then you're later pushing this to a production environment with your custom domain, this would work because you're deploying to two separate environments. It does pose a conflict if you try to keep updating the stage since it's dependent on so much other resources. So we did a nifty condition where we use the domain name param, and we use an environment variable, and later detect that in our code. So this wraps up the base code. So if I open up my project, and that's actually just a default project, but if I go to project folder, discard this, and let's just select this, view files, create, save changes, and there we go. So we are seeing additional resources, right? We're seeing our API domain record, we're seeing our certificate, and this is what we have just for our API endpoints or CRUD operations. And this should give you just a good start if you want to build other projects where you can leverage just the basic Python knowledge you know now and make services that you can expose to the world. So thanks for watching.